Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Sunday, November 14th, 2021, and you are watching or listening to another edition of Forward Maryland. My name is Bill Woodcock, and it is an honor today and a privilege to do two things as we change seats in this program. Jason Booms, our co-host for the last 2+ years, has stepped aside to concentrate on other avenues through which he may contribute to the public debate and discourse. And I'm sure, and we're sure, that Jason is going to do great. And we're looking forward to having him back on the podcast a time or two in the not too distant future. However, it is with great joy, admiration, and even appreciation that I introduce the new co-host of Forward Maryland. You remember him from sitting in the second chair many a time during the spring and summer. His name is Steve Hunt. Steve, say hi to the nice people.
Hello, nice people. And Bill, thank you very much for the very warm welcome and obviously for the support and welcome over the years. I've always felt like this was home. I know it's funny to say since I'm sitting at home right now, but you and Jason always made me feel welcome in this chair, on this program, on this podcast. So thank you very much for the kind words. And to Jason, if you're out there listening, thank you. I have been a fan and admirer, a follower, even before Forward Maryland, back to the Spartan Consideration blog days. So what I will say is I'm not sitting in for Jason Booms. I am holding it down until Jason comes back or does not. And like you, Bill, always good to have the Boomster here. Sparty, you're always welcome. Sorry about Purdue, by the way.
Sorry about, honesty. That was all sweet up until the last second. That's just how we are.
I got to give him something, if it was all peaches and cream, he'd probably wonder, who are you and what did you do with Steve Hunt? So, I had to throw something out there to make sure he knew it was still me.
This is true. This is true. Steve, today's podcast is entitled 21, 20, 22. Not necessarily a Quinn Martin production, but Act 1, 21. Steve, I know it was about 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks ago now, but we have a new governor in Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, defeated Terry McAuliffe. The Republican beat the Democrat. The Republican candidate came scarily close to unseating Democratic incumbent Phil Murphy in the great state of New Jersey. What do you make out of these 2021? They're not really midterm. They're kind of the check-in elections the year after the Biden-Harris election. What do you make of these results?
Well, I would say if I were a Democratic strategist, guru, whatever you want to call them, I would be much more concerned about New Jersey than I was about Virginia. Virginia, Bill, as you know, there's a history there. I think out of the last, I want to say 11 or 12, it's a pretty big number. You call that a trend. The party that won the White House next year, that party does not win the governor's mansion in Virginia in the Commonwealth. The only time that did not happen, oh, by the way, was in 2013 when Barack Obama won in 2012 and one Terry McAuliffe won the governor's mansion in 2013. So there's a lot to unpack about Virginia. I know we're going to talk about that, so I'll put that to the side for a second. New Jersey is a bigger concern. I mean, Phil Murphy, by all accounts, ran a solid campaign, ran the campaign he was supposed to, did not commit the slips, dips, and had the issues that McAuliffe had. Again, we'll get into that campaign in Virginia since it's closer to us. The Murphy's opponent, Cicerelli, or Chitterelli, Cicero, I'm thinking about the old Caps player. Chitterelli, I believe, is the guy's name. He wasn't a great candidate himself, but yet he came, like you said, dangerously close to pulling it off. And so, if I'm a Dem, I look at New Jersey where Biden was plus 16, and now you have Murphy, plus, I guess 3 was the final number. That's a problem. And some of the issues that hurt Murphy, some of them were national. A lot of them were the economy, which, is going to be a big thing going forward. So that's the one I would worry about is what happened in New Jersey and the fact that a race in which Murphy should have won by 10, barely pulled it off.
Well, I think what you see is about a 10-point swing. When you look at both of these states, you see a 10 to a 12 or 13-point swing for the Republican.
Yes.
If you look at both states' results taken in total, I mean, 10-point in New Jersey and about 13-point in Virginia. And I don't want to do too much to talk about it because it was a couple weeks ago, but the Virginia race, well, I think both races taken, but especially the Virginia race illustrates, I think, what the Republican playbook is looking like going forward. And that in Youngkin, you don't have a candidate who completely embraced Trump. You have somebody who stands kind of ambiguous. In other words, liking a lot of the Trump policies, but not liking Trump the guy, which is where a lot of average Republican voters are, and independents who are more open to voting Republican. And Trump, for maybe not for once, but because he's a fairly wise political operator, despite all the bluster and bravado, kept his mouth shut and was very much only visible on the edges, on the fringes of that campaign, and really wasn't a direct factor. I mean, yeah, a lot of people thought that Trump's ego would get the better of him and that he'd come out with some full-throated endorsement, which would then rally legions of voters to Terry McAuliffe's cause. And that didn't happen. So, again, folks, Trump is no dummy. He knows where the bread is buttered on, and that bread was buttered on the red side of the slice, and that's exactly what happened. So I think when you're looking at Republican sentiment being 10 points stronger than it was last year, and Steve, this will be relevant when we get to topic 2. Remember that margin, 10 points stronger. That's very scary for Democrats. I mean, there was just a Washington Post poll today that said that the Republican candidate in the generic congressional ballot is ahead of the Democratic candidate by 3 points. That hardly ever happens. And normally it's a strong Democratic lean going into that election. And then you wind up having the sort of Congress we have, which is very split. The last thing I'll say about the Virginia vote is that it really was the worst of both worlds for Democrats, because you had problems where not enough Democrats came out, or Democrats failed to be activated in a lot of the Northern Virginia suburbs, Loudoun County, Fairfax, for example, Prince William. But then also in the rural areas, which already were overwhelmingly red, they even went more so. So even where votes were 2-1 Republican, they became 4-1 or 5-1. And I believe the final margin of victory was 75,000 votes between Youngkin and McAuliffe. Those votes count too. Yeah, they count in Fairfax and Loudoun and Prince William too, but so do those. So it was kind of the failure, for a statewide strategy. Now, was it because of McAuliffe being a retread? I think that probably was a contributing factor. I think maybe the stronger factor was about not really running on a message, not really running on a vision, running on a campaign of, well, this guy's just like a little Donald Trump. If that is the Democrats' message going into 2022, that could wind up being a long year.
Yeah, and you're right. And I think we could do a whole, and this is where Jason would come in handy. We could do a whole campaign. Well, I'm sorry, we could do a whole podcast on the McAuliffe campaign. And I think that I know a lot of Democrats don't like to look in the mirror, but let's just start in Virginia, and I'll be very brief here. Terry McAuliffe was a god-awful campaigner. He was a god-awful candidate. He was he just wasn't that one to win this race. He made it easy. In fact, I was watching something the other day where they had Glenn Youngkin's ad person, and even he was saying, we knew Terry McAuliffe as a very smart person, and we were surprised at how easy he made it for us. So I know people want to make excuses about various things, especially because McAuliffe is so embedded in the Democratic establishment, friends of the Clintons, et cetera. But he was a horrible candidate. So I think it was a combination of things that made Virginia possible. That was number one. Number two was Virginia, and credit to Glenn Youngkin from a strategic standpoint. He localized the hell out of that thing. You had McAuliffe looking at the California recall situation, the results, thinking, I'm going to run the same playbook. I'm not Trump, and this other guy is. And it did not work in Virginia because Youngkin boiled that thing down to a couple of base issues. We could talk about where he was on those issues, especially education. Again, a whole other podcast, but he localized it. And I think if there's a silver lining for the Democrats for next year, when you're talking about the House and Senate races, you can't localize those. You know, some of the national issues, some of those Trump issues are out there, and you can't run away from them. So if there was one silver lining, I would say for the Democrats is they could run on things that McAuliffe tried to and failed miserably because it was a local election. So the other thing I would say about Virginia that showed, and a lot of people talk about this after the 2020 election, I heard several people say, you know what, we've defeated Trump. Now the mission is to defeat Trumpism. And I think Youngkin ran on Trumpism. And I think that's the thing that Democrats need to look out for. It's not about one man. It's not about this twice impeached, disgraced joke of a former president of the United States. It's about the philosophy, the policies, all of those things. It is now a battle against Trumpism, and it is a continuation of what Joe Biden called the battle for the soul of America. Are the Democrats up to that task? That's going to be the question in my mind.
No, you're very much correct, and you brought up a very good point about the gubernatorial recall in California, because that leading candidate kind of a little bit was kind of like Trump.
Yeah, he was
and of course that recall dynamic was so totally different than the dynamic of the Virginia election. But no, Youngkin was smart. And I think that this was a playbook, and I think a template for Republican candidates and Republican, on every level. You bring up some very interesting stuff about the 2020 election and the defeat of Trumpism as opposed to defeating Trump. And I wanted to hearken you back, and this is a good transition into our second topic. To those halcyon days of 2020, since we did just celebrate a year after the election, and yes, of course, that did happen, of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So, Steve, no less an authority than the New York Times of today they have an article, "Test Your Knowledge on the Swings of the 2020 Election." So these are 13 questions. We'll go through these quite quickly.
Okay.
Of not just, how do you remember the 2020 election, but also in things that happened in the 2020 election, indicators in that election, but also comparisons to 2016. Are you ready for this challenge, sir?
Challenge accepted, sir.
Excellent. Number one. What was Joe Biden's final margin of victory in the popular vote? Was it A, 0 to 3 percentage points, B, 3 to 6, C, 6 to 9?
Wow. I mean, I know the raw number. I'm gonna say 3 to 6. I know it was 81 million to 74 million, but without whipping out a calculator, I don't know what that translates to.
Well, you are correct, sir.
Okay, there you go.
4.5 percentage points, 51.3 to 46.9.
Okay.
46.9.
Yeah.
2. Where did Biden make his biggest gains relative to Hillary Clinton's showing in 2016? A, suburbs, B, cities, C, rural areas.
I'm going to say suburbs.
You are 2 for 2, sir.
Ah,
That one I thought was a little, number one was tricky. Number two, I thought was a wee bit easier. So Trump won suburban voters 47 to 45%, but Biden won them 54 to 43. Which of these two statements is accurate? Number 3. A, Biden made significant gains among women. Biden made significant gains among men.
I'm going to say A.
You are correct. But he did gain significant ground among men. So the Democratic share of the male vote increased to 46% from 41%. So
Okay.
why did they say the answer was A? I think the answer is B. I think that's a misprint.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm going to throw that one out. I just
Okay.
realized that. How did the New
Maybe-
York
maybe he
Times make
gained-
an error?
Maybe he gained in both and he gained more amongst women because I know that was a big issue. I
They
don't know.
don't give a statistic about women.
Okay. Hey, the Times. Okay.
New York Times, get your act together.
Yes. That was not fit
Number-
to print.
Misfit to print. Number 4. Were Donald J. Trump's gains with Hispanic voters primarily regional, as in South Florida and South Texas? Or did he make these gains throughout the country? A, South Florida or Texas. B, country.
B.
It is B. It is B. So Mr. Biden underperformed Mrs. Clinton overall in Los Angeles County, the Bronx, and Philadelphia County, amongst others. Trump's vote share increased to 27 from 22% in LA County, to 16 from 9% in the Bronx, and to 18 from 15% in Philadelphia. I mean, these small numbers are, they're huge percentage jumps, and you still are talking about numbers of voters, folks.
Yep. And that is, if you want a scary number, if you're a Democrat going forward, that's a scary number. That if a guy like Trump with all of his crap can do that, imagine what a Glenn Youngkin could pull off as he's Trumpism looking like Mr. Rogers.
5. Did
Sorry.
Biden gain ground among white Americans without a relative degree relative to Hillary Clinton's performance in 2016? A, he lost ground. B, he gained ground.
Amongst what group again?
Oh, now I have white voters without a college degree.
He gained.
He did. So he lost white voters without a college degree by 32 points, an improvement on Mrs. Clinton's 36-point loss.
Yep. Deplorables. That killed you.
6. Did Biden make significant gains among married men or among single men?
Whew. That one's not as easy as you would think. I'm going to say married men.
You are correct, sir. Trump won married men 54 to 44%, but down significantly from a 62-32 margin in 2016.
And I'm going to credit that to the wives.
I would credit that to the wives too, but that also means that married men were not voting for the female candidate for president.
No, they were not. I think that's also in there.
That's ugly.
Yes, it is.
Number 7, did Trump gain or lose ground among voters who are part of veteran households? A, did he gain? B, he lost. C, he did about the same. This is Trump. Did Trump gain or lose?
I'm going to say he gained.
You were doing so well.
Damn it.
He lost. He lost ground.
Really?
He still won them. 55 to 43, but down from 61 to 35 in 2016.
Interesting.
Number 8, did Trump gain ground among white Catholics or lose ground with them?
He lost ground with those folks.
He did.
Thank you, Joe Biden.
Mr. Trump won white non-Hispanic Catholics 57-42, which was a decrease from his 64-31 winning margin in 2016.
Yep.
What about number 9? What about Trump's performance with black voters relative to 2016? A,
This is easy.
Trump appeared to gain some ground with black voters. B, he appeared to lose some ground. He appeared to do about the same. Well, you say it's so easy? What's the answer, smarty pants?
He gained ground, and that was driven by an increase in black men. Black women held relatively equal to 2016, which was about 2 or 3%. Black men went up. His numbers went up.
Data suggests that he won 10% of the black vote in 2020, an increase from 7% in 2016.
Yeah. And it was all driven by black men. I think black women stayed about the same.
It doesn't say here a gender breakdown, but it does mention results from black areas of cities like DC, Chicago, and Philadelphia.
Yeah, too many black men remembering those rap songs that had shout outs to Donald Trump in them, I think. I don't know.
But it also mentions the higher turnout amongst black voters.
Yep.
In 2020 than 2016. Yet more of them still came to the polls, and more of those voters still came to the polls and voted for Trump.
Yep.
Number 10. How did Trump do with Asian American voters relative to 2016? Same thing. A, gained ground. B, lost ground. C, about the same.
Ooh, I'm going to say he gained ground, but I'm leaning towards they stayed the same, but I'm going to go with gained ground.
Should have went with your second intuition, Steve Hunt.
Yeah, I just have a feeling the answer is going to be gained ground, but there's something in me that says the answer is going to be stayed the same.
It is stay the same. Democrats dropped 1 point in the voter share with this group. 11. Which party appeared to make gains in neighborhoods with a particularly high concentration of Jewish voters?
Wow. I'm gonna say Biden.
I knew this one.
I'm gonna say Biden.
Nope.
Oh, you know what? Yeah.
Trump made substantial gains in such neighborhoods like Rockland County, New York, parts of Brooklyn, parts of California like Beverly Hills.
And I should have thought about the way in which he supported Israel in a lot of the
Netanyahu
stuff there. Yeah, Netanyahu. Yeah, I totally didn't think that one all the way through. All right.
12. Did the Republican, now these last two questions, I mean, as if these other 11 haven't, these last two questions, these answers are blood chilling. 12. Did the Republicans' advantage in the Electoral College relative to the popular vote grow in 2020, decline, or stay the same?
Electoral College relative to the popular vote declined?
Grew. Republicans' edge grew, so meaning the margin in the red states as opposed to the margin in the blue states.
Oh, that's where they were going. Okay, I'm just looking at what the Electoral College final number was.
Well, yeah. Well, it grew from 2.9 percentage points to around 3.8 percentage points.
So they won. So the states that Republicans won, they won by a bigger margin. Okay, I didn't understand the question on that.
So it mentions Wisconsin as the example because Wisconsin was the state that, if you look at the rankings of the margins of the states, Wisconsin both gave Trump and Biden the 270th electoral vote.
Right.
So Trump won in 2016 by 0.8 in Wisconsin, but that Clinton won the popular vote by 2.1 meant that the state that decided the election was 2.9 points more Republican than the nation.
Gotcha.
So Biden won Wisconsin by 0.6 points, or 0.7, given that Biden won the popular vote by 4.5. The state that decided the election was 3.8 points more Republican than the nation. In other words, and here's a cheerful stat, Mr. Biden could have won the popular vote by 3.7 percentage points and still lost the election.
That's our system at work.
It could happen in 24.
Yep.
Number 13, bonus question. Which describes the election better? It was quite close or it was fairly decisive?
I am going to say it was Biden did 3, quite close.
Yes. Yes, that is correct.
But the number of votes that really tilted the thing weren't a hell of a whole lot.
If the right distribution of about 21,500 people across 3 key states had voted for Trump instead of Biden, Biden would have lost Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin, leaving the Electoral College in a 269 tie. In that case, Trump most likely would have won on the basis of Republicans' advantage in the U.S. House delegations.
Yep.
So, in other words, a basketball arenas, modern day basketball arenas, filled with people.
Yep. That I knew. Yep. Didn't take a whole lot.
So there we go, boys and girls. There's your 2020 recap. So what does 21 and 20 have to do for 22? Well, depends, I guess, where you are. And I guess we'll stay home in the great state of Maryland. There is also a column in the Washington Post today by Malaya Cromer, who is a professor at Goucher College, a friend of this podcast, and hopefully we can have her on as a guest, and a political science professor at George Mason University, who speak to the relevance of the Youngkin race and also some of these statistics. It cites certain of these statistics in making a case that Republican success in the state of Maryland in 2022 is not necessarily a fait accompli. The Hogan coalition may be fairly difficult to reassemble. And the biggest part of the Hogan coalition, which would be hard to reassemble, would be the 25 to 30% of Democrats who reliably voted for Hogan in both of Hogan's elections. Yep. However, despite the state's electoral advantage of registration advantage of Democrats over Republicans, one could still see where 15 to 20, for about 15% of Democrats still voted for Trump, even though Trump got throttled in 2020. So, Steve, is this really, I mean, what do you think? I mean, and then in local races, right, you know, we have Republicans trying to get back the county executive seats in Frederick County, in Anne Arundel County, in Howard County. Yep. All very strong candidates in all 3 of those counties, not quite as certain or positive about how it looks in Montgomery County or Baltimore County. Right. But Steve, what do you think? Do you think Republicans have as strong a road to toe as maybe is suggested?
Well, I would agree with the idea that Maryland is not Virginia. You know, Maryland, you know, in Virginia, Youngkin was the 2 key constituencies he was able to, well, there were 3 pillars to it. One was voter turnout in Democratic areas. You talked about Prince William County, the Richmond suburbs also were down, especially amongst African-American voters. But he ran up big numbers in rural areas, and there is a lot of that in Virginia. I mean, you look at that, you know, everything south of Northern Virginia and west of Richmond, you know, it's just a big old chunk of real estate. I don't think we have that here in Maryland. You know, the Eastern Shore, western part of the state, the population just isn't there, even if the numbers run up are really, really big. The other thing that Youngkin was able to do was knock down the number in Northern Virginia, primarily, and you talked about this earlier, independents who quite frankly lean more conservative who didn't like Trump, but were still down with Trumpism, they went from Biden because they didn't like Trump. They went back home to Youngkin because Youngkin wasn't Trump. I don't think we have that level of, we don't have enough of those type of voters in Maryland that Hogan threaded a really fine needle, and it really is more of a tribute to how good he is as a political animal relative to the state of Maryland. I look at the candidates running, the two primary candidates, Cox and Schultz. I don't see them threading that needle. I don't see them doing what Hogan did in, say, Howard County. I don't see them doing what Hogan did in a place like Baltimore County. It's who you have to get are much more. There's much more difficulty in getting to those people as a Republican in Maryland than there is in Virginia. I think you have persuadables that can flip things in Virginia in a much larger number than you do in Maryland. So at a statewide level, it would take Democrats running somebody that is just so repels those moderate Dems, because it really is not just independents, it's also moderate Dems, that repels them so greatly that they flip to somebody like Cox, which you gotta want to leave this side and you gotta want to go to this side. Hogan gave you somewhere to go. Schultz might give you that somewhere to go. Cox doesn't give you that place to go. Hogan gave you a safe place to go as opposed to an Anthony Brown or Ben Jealous. If a Michael Steele became the nominee, there's your safe place, but I don't think he gets there if he even actually does it. So I think it's a much heavier lift in Maryland statewide in the counties. Even here in Howard, is there a path for Alan Kittleman? Yes, but it certainly ain't the path that he had in 2014. Not even close. So I can't speak for the other counties. I think Montgomery is a heavier lift. Frederick, that might be a possibility. Baltimore County, I think Johnny O he's gotten it done over there. So I don't see him going down. Stuart Pittman over in Anne Arundel, that's another heavy lift. It's possible, but if you wanted me to rank those county executives, the heaviest out for the Republicans would be, I think, Baltimore County right now, followed by Howard, followed by Montgomery, and then you could throw Frederick and Anne Arundel into the mix. Frederick might be their biggest pickup opportunity of the bunch.
Yeah, I think actually it's interesting the place you wound up on those five, because I would agree with you about, I would say Baltimore County's the hardest one to flip, and then Montgomery, and then I think I would go, actually go Howard, Anne Arundel, and Frederick, with Anne Arundel being surprisingly close to Howard. To Frederick.
Yeah.
And Howard, I think, fairly squarely in the middle. But I think what you bring up are some very good points about, that capture, what we've been talking about these last 25, 30 minutes or so. And also that this little questionnaire kind of highlights, to speak of Trumpism is not dead. It is out there. It is hanging. 46.9% of the American voting public voted for that a second time, even after all the things of the first 4 years. Although, okay, January 6th and the second impeachment were still to come, but still, there was plenty else, and still 47% of the people voted for that.
Yep.
I think what it shows, and this has kind of been the theme of this entire podcast, is that as we start to go into the 2022 electoral cycle, there is a very delicate balance, and it does not take a great lot to tip that over a certain way. And if it tips over a certain way, well, then you may just, no pun intended, but you roll away the rock that's keeping the troll in the cage,
Yep.
And then that person winds up running again for president in 2024, should the wrong things happen.
Yeah.
Could Maryland be a contributor to that? I'm a little bit less sanguine than you are about those chances, Steve. I can see a candidate coming together, probably more so Schultz than Cox.
Yes.
But not necessarily because of any merit of hers, but because of what could be a very divisive gubernatorial primary on the Democratic side. Without a clear leader, who can speak to vision. One of the things that Youngkin did very well in his candidacy for governor of Virginia was speak to issues, speak to a vision. In his case, jobs and the economy. And jobs and the economy are still going to be the big issue next year. And, and it'll be interesting in a week or two, we should do another top 10 gubernatorial ranking. You get to play with that for the first time. Sharpen up your markers.
Right back here.
But who I think are going to speak to these issues, because I do think that these are going to be the issues that are going to predominate the election more so than culture issues, equity issues. I'm not saying that it's right that they do. I'm not saying, social justice issues. I'm not saying it's right that any of these issues take a back seat, but I am saying that it is what winds up being on the front burner of Mr. and Mrs. Maryland's, plate, of their list of things that they want to care about when they're electing somebody. And I think it will be very important to see what Democrat gets elected. I think there are several of the Democratic contenders who can speak to bread and butter, kitchen, dining table issues. And there are several who are missing the mark.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right about what the issues are, because I know, again, we're watching this ad person for Youngkin on TV. He said they locked in on three things: jobs in the economy, crime, and education. And education really came on board later in the game. And there's a whole different thing with that. What really set that whole education issue up was what I like to call COVID fatigue. And everybody wants to say it was the whole CRT debate, but I think it was COVID fatigue set the table, and he used the CRT or critical race theory issue to tip the balance. So, there are a lot of people who say, oh, he just won because he ran this racist campaign against Toni Morrison. No, folks, that was not the whole story. You got to go past the headlines, go deeper, folks. You please. There were other things, but again, he made it hyper local. Meanwhile, Terry McAuliffe was running a national campaign, and Youngkin tapped into, a lot of times people just want to know that you're thinking about their issues. It's the old Bill Clinton, I feel your pain, right? That's what they want to hear. And I never saw Terry McAuliffe speak to, I get it. One thing that encouraged me about Joe Biden, his speech in Baltimore last week was, it wasn't all, oh, we signed this deal and everything's great, the economy's great. He said, I get that people are still feeling the pain of inflation and costs and supply. A lot of times that's what people they just want to know that you're thinking about them. And Youngkin tapped into that emotion. McAuliffe didn't. And so I would caution anybody running from, whether you're running for governor to county executive to our open board of ed seat next year, don't deny or disregard how people feel. It may not be logical how they feel. It may not make sense how they feel, but they feel how they feel. Acknowledge it, and then speak to those concerns and what you're going to do about them. That's my free political advice of the day. Don't act like they don't know what they're talking about, or they're not feeling what they're supposed to be feeling, or they're no, acknowledge it, please. So could the Republicans do well in Maryland? Yes, but I think I would say it would be as much about Democrats losing by screwing it up than it would be about Republicans winning. They, they're going to have to be given an opening to walk through. So whether you're one of our 10 or Calvin Ball, don't give them the opening. You'll be fine.
And with that, we open our observations, investigation, and following of the 2022 state and local election cycle in the state of Maryland. This is why they call it Forward Maryland, ladies and gentlemen. Steve, you've made it through your first podcast as the official co-host. How you feel?
Feeling good, Bill. You make it easy as always, so I appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to it. I mean, you know me, I love politics, and we're getting into the election cycle. We're getting new candidates in different races all the time, so things are heating up here in, as you call it, the land of milk and honey, and statewide. So looking forward to the next top 10. Looking forward to talking about some of the folks who have jumped into the pool here in good old Howard County, and hopefully getting some of those folks on this podcast and talk about the issues and hear what they've got to say. And in the words of the admiral who ran with Ross Perot, who are they and why are they here?
Admiral Stockdale.
Stockdale, there we go.
Jim Stockdale. He passed away a couple years ago.
And rest in peace, Colin Powell. Speaking of military passings away.
Indeed. Quite a terrific, captivating individual.
Yes, it is as American a story as you can get. If you look at his entire story of his family Jamaican roots and how he came to be Colin Powell, some interesting stories there. So yeah, hell of a story. Whether you agree or disagree with anything that he may have decided or done, it's a hell of a story.
Well, to your kind comments, Steve, about the podcast, I say, in the words of Teddy Roosevelt, bully. So we shall endeavor to do this very same thing next week, sir. And
yes, sir.
Hopefully we shall find a guest to join us on our noble podcast. But yeah, even if it's just the two of us, I know it's going to be a great one.
Yeah, candidates, come on in. The water's great. You'll have a good time, and you'll be able to get your message out. We're here.
We're ready. We don't bite mostly.
No,
mostly. Nope. Well, for Steve Hunt, my name is Bill Woodcock, and you have been watching or listening to another edition of Forward Maryland. We'll be coming back at you next weekend. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.